We're now live on YouTube.
Woohoo!
Yeah. All right.
This is weird. All right, so this will be an introduction to ggplot 2, most in the actual introduction set, so I'm not going to be able to cover everything that ggplot 2 can do because it can do everything. And that's also because I'm just learning it still, so I'm pretty much down in the mud with you. But I feel like I have a snorkel, or at least. So we're gonna start just by, if you haven't installed it yet, this is how to do it, the code to get it. And also just a data note, it requires data frames to work with. So make sure that you're loading data frames or table data frames if you're using dplyr. And it really helps if your data is tidy to begin with. That'll save you a lot of time. So there is a logic to ggplot 2. The GG stands for Grammar of Graphics. And Hadley Wickham wrote this package based on this 2005 Wilkinson, I think it's a book or a paper, I can't remember, I haven't actually read it, but it's based on this grammar that was created to describe layerable graphics with an underlying structure to the syntax. So it helped me at the beginning to think of ggplot 2 as sort of layers in ArcGIS. If you work in ArcGIS, it's helpful to think of it like that at first. So one of the really confusing things about ggplot when you start it is the syntax does sort of seem random when you start building plots. At least I felt like I didn't really understand. I was just sort of trying things for a long time without really understanding the underlying logic. And I'm getting there, but I've made a diagram that I hope will help give you sort of more of a 30,000-foot view of the syntax, and we'll go to that in a minute. But just to have some vocabulary so that you know what I'm referring to in the syntax. And then also, once you have the vocabulary, the biggest thing is being able to find help later, right? So if you know which component of the plot you're having trouble with, just knowing what that's called will really help you get through the documentation later, so you can actually troubleshoot yourself. So that's my goal for today, is to not give you the skills to do everything that's possible in ggplot 2, because that's not possible in an hour, but just to at least be able to give you the vocabulary so that you can get help later. All right, so the arguments of ggplot itself, there are many, but the first one is the data, and so that's that ... at the beginning. So data gets pulled into the ggplot 2 function, and then the variables in the data are mapped to various aesthetics, which we'll talk about next. So aesthetics, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's how your data are represented visually, and it's a mapping. So a mapping of data to the x-coordinate aesthetic. So it's what you actually see on the graph. So you map data to the x-axis, you map data to the y-axis, you map variables in your data to colors, shapes, fills, size. So all of those things, transparency, they're all aesthetics of the data. So pull in the data to ggplot 2 function and then map those data to various aesthetics, and that's the next argument, the aesthetics. And then another component is geometry. So geometry is essentially what determines the shape of the graph. So points, lines, bars, histograms, box plot. Well, no, box plots are stats, but what actually is displayed can be largely attributed to the geometry argument. And then the statistic is the statistical transformation of the data. So if you don't use something like a box plot, then you're probably just using the identity statistical transformation, which is just these are what my data are, plot them. Don't do any statistics on them before you plot them. But if you use a histogram, then the statistic you're using is binning. You're using a density plot, the statistics that you're using is density, etc. And then faceting is if you want to actually break your data into subsets and then plot each subset of those data, and we'll see some examples of that. And you can do either a facet wrap or a facet grid, and then that var is just wrapping or faceting that variable in your data. And then you can tell it what number of rows or number of columns you want to see in that facet. And then scales, which I feel are probably the most abstract, and maybe that's just me because I'm bad with statistics, but scales are when you when you can't display something correctly on your x-axis or your y-axis, it's probably due to the scale that you're using. So you need one for each aesthetic mapping. The defaults will take you a long way, but like when you're trying to map different variables to a color path or a color gradient, the scale is what does that for you as well. And then finally, the coordinate system, the default is Cartesian. There are a few other ones, but they're not all that useful unless you're trying to do something very specific, like with a polar coordinate or something. So this is, if you were to build ggplot with the grammar that underlies it, this is what the specification would look like. So you have ggplot with your data pulled in there, and then you tell each layer what aesthetics you want mapped to that layer, and then you add a scale and then a coordinate system. And the statistics go within the layer itself. So the translation of this full specification is using the diamonds data set, map the variable caret to the horizontal x position. So x equals caret, map a variable price to the y position, and display the raw data. So the statistic is identity, position is identity, and with point are the geometry that are colored according to the variable cut. And finally, add a smoothing line. So the next layer is the actual smoothing line with all of the same data mapping, so all the same aesthetics mapped to the same places, and then put everything onto a log transformed axis scale. So if you were to pass this into R, you would get this pretty ugly plot, but yeah, it's sort of a mess, but this is what you would see if you had built those layers layer by layer with actual full specification. And very rarely will you ever have to write all of this out. In fact, it's sort of an inconvenient way to use ggplot. I just wanted to show you so that you have an understanding of where all of the arguments actually go into ggplot if you were using it like in the full grammatical sense. And then to actually show you that, so hopefully this is the diagram that I was saying will hopefully give you a full 30,000 foot view. Okay, so this is what goes into a ggplot. So at the highest level is the actual plot, and a plot is made up of one or more layers. There can be as many layers as you need to be able to make the plot look like what you want it to look like. And then in each layer, you have a geometry, a position adjustment, a statistical transformation, and data mapping of aesthetics. So this layer here, that first layer that we saw, if you were just to pass it, this is the plot that you would get. So just a scatter point plot of the diamonds versus price, or the caret versus price. And then the second layer has its own data mapping of aesthetics, its own statistical transformation, its own position adjustment, its own geometry. And you add that layer to the previous plot that we just made, and you get this smoothing line. So that smoothing line is an actual layer on top of the first layer. And then you can add as many layers as you want. And then the other arguments that go into plot, scale. So here's us putting these layers onto a log transform scale for the x and y axes, and you get this plot. And then a coordinate system, I just wanted to show you what it actually does if you were to change it. So yeah, you can change it into a polar coordinate system. It's not a very useful map, or a useful plot, but that's what the coordinate system does. A more useful coordinate system specification is like the flip. If you want to turn a bar graph to a horizontal bar graph, that's where you would put that argument in. And then faceting, if you want to break this plot, well, the one before we coordinate polarized it, if you want to facet wrap it by color, then this is what the resulting plot would look like. And if you want to grid instead, this is what the resulting plot would look like. So hopefully this gives you a visual sense of the arguments and where they go and what they do in ggplot. Yeah, you can peruse it. And all of this will be on the GitHub repository. Yeah?
So on the scales, scales arguments, we scale it to a log. Does that remove the base scale and then you plot it all in log? You know, in base plotting, you just basically like overlay things.
Right.
there before, just like remove that and then reply.
My understanding, and Noam, you can jump in if I'm wrong, but I think once you add the scale with the log transformation, it takes the additional stat and then calculates the stat again based on the scale and then overlays that. So I think it does replace in a practical sense.
Yeah. In base, when you use an argument like axis, it's just a drawing argument.
Right, exactly.
Whereas here, that scale argument is like changes the way the data is mapped, essentially. So it's changing the whole calculation of how the graph is made rather than just putting something on top.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. All right, and going back to slides. All right, so then all those really long specifications might have scared you, but really you almost never have to type all those things out. And the main reason is that you almost never have to make that complicated of a graph from the get-go. At least the majority of my graphs are far less than 3 layers. And then also the defaults are very intelligent. So that full this color one that we did that was all of this can actually just be shortened to this, and it gives you the exact same graph. Okay, and then I just wanted to mention a few thoughts on Qplot. So Qplot stands for Qplot, and it's in the beginning of the book, the ggplot 2 book. I don't know if it's going to be in the beginning of the new book as well, but I started by trying to learn Qplot, and I ended up having to unlearn and relearn a lot of things. So I would it makes strong assumptions in order to reduce the amount of typing, and I think that functionality of Qplot is most useful after you already understand all of the syntax of ggplot 2. So and also it mimics the actual syntax of plot. So if you're used to working in base R graphics, Qplot can seem very alluring because it seems like you don't actually have to change much behavior to get all of the beautiful plots from ggplot 2. But yeah, I would just recommend starting with ggplot 2, just the full specification, and then relying on Qplot once you're actually comfortable with all of the grammar and logic of ggplot 2. That's just my personal recommendation. And then if any of you are in Richard McAllery's stats class, he's fond of giving just horoscopic advice for the use of statistics in general, so I thought I would try giving some horoscopic advice for ggplot 2, because I literally have just gone through this learning process in the last month or so. So it's all pretty fresh for me, and hopefully I can help you out a little bit if you're just starting like I was. So it will make the syntax of ggplot 2 will make the most sense when you already have a picture in your head of what you want your graph to look like. So that will help a lot. I spent a lot of time just sort of fiddling around on ggplot 2, and like I said, just sort of trying aesthetics randomly in random geometry arguments, and you can kind of get there, but you don't really understand what's going on. And so it really helps if you have an idea of what you want your graph to look like already, and then build it according to the layering syntax that ggplot 2 is meant to do. So that will really help a lot. And then, yeah, just take the time to learn the syntax, and diving in with your own data will speed this up. The diamonds data set is great, but you don't know it as well as you know your own data. So I think I would recommend working with your own data. And then just start with the most basic graph and build up from there. So on that note, I'm going to show you some plots from my own data. So this is just a really tiny data set. It's really easy to work with. I work with tagged fish, acoustic telemetry fish, and I had some old V5 tags, which is little tiny transmitters. They've been sitting on the shelf for a year, and they lose battery life on the shelf, but I wanted to know if I was still able to deploy them. So I just pulled a subset of the tags and dropped them in a tank with a receiver to see how many days of tag life they still had, because according to the manufacturer's calculations, they should have had about 23 days, and I just wanted to see if that was true. So I set up 3 tanks, each with a receiver and a temperature logger. One of the tanks has 10 tags. One of the tags was removed from the data set because it didn't actually activate, so we're working with just really small data set, 9 tags. And then each tag pings its own unique ID on a random delay between 30 and 60 seconds to the receiver, and then the receiver records detection. So in the end, I have a data set with 9 individual tags, but like thousands of actual detections. So lots of points, but only a few, lots of observations, but only a few actual tags to work with, which is nice. So the plots that I wanted to see were the temperature in all 3 tanks. I just wanted to make sure that nothing was going on weird with the water over at Kaba and maybe messing with the detection probability. And then the total number of detections per tag and the detections over time. And I would be expecting them to sort of ping a lot at the beginning and then fall off as the tags die. So I'm just going to show you how to make those plots. Okay. That's weird. There we go. Okay. Let me see if I can blow this up a little bit. Okay, great. So this is just getting it all started. If at any point you see code that you don't understand or you want me to explain, let me know. So this is just loading in the temperature data, changing it into an appropriate date format. That's really important if you want to plot date on your x-axis or y-axis. ggplot2 will treat it differently whether it's discrete or continuous, and that has to do with the scale argument. So if you want a continuous x-axis, you actually have to pass that to the scale x continuous parentheses scale portion of the specification in ggplot. And if you want a discrete axis, it's the same. It's scale x discrete parentheses. So if you're having trouble with your axes, that's a good place to start with the help documentation. So this, I was just filtering out some outliers in the temperature. I took the hobo out of the tank and the temperature spiked up really fast, and I wanted to keep that out of my plot. So okay, and then this is the actual detections. There's a weird column at the beginning that I'm getting rid of. You guys are about to see how actually clunky my data tidying is. Yeah.
So that YND command, is that specifically for ggplot?
That's actually from Lubridate. So Bonnie has a really great blog post on the Dave Razar users, and it's, yeah, Lubridate also a Hadley Wickham package. Yes. Of course, if it's useful, it's probably a Hadley Wickham package. And yeah, Lubridate is a really useful package for. They are. They absolutely are. Yeah, and all of my data sets are date-based, so I've been using that a lot. And I have that blog post bookmarked on my browser. Okay, where are we? And then colors. So I just I downloaded some a color palette that I liked off of colorlovers.org. And those are just those actual R. Okay, so the first plot that I want to see, I just want to see all the detections over time. So adding a date variable, got this new data frame. So now I have the tag ID over here, the serial or the receiver that was in the tank with it, the date and time of the actual detection, and then I have a shortened date column so that I can just put that on the x-axis so that the x-axis doesn't look really, really cluttered. And then I put a day-hour column in there so that I can round it off if I want to join it with the temperature data later, because my temperature data is once every hour. So just sort of making the data play nicely together here. So this is just creating a table for a number of detections by hour of the day. All right, so here's the actual plot. So ggplot, and this is the data that I'm asking it to plot. I'm telling it to put day hour on the x-axis and number, so number of detections in that hour on the y-axis. And I want it to look like a scatter plot, so I'm telling it to give me a geometry of point. And then I'm saving it to an object so that I can actually build on it later. So I just save it as G. And then once you have it saved as an object, to add layers, you can just say G plus and then add the layers. And then just another syntax tip, put the plus signs at the end of the line every time. Don't try to start a line with the plus sign. I don't know. I had trouble with that, and it just, I don't know. It's just a good practice. Okay. So here's the actual detection plots. So this was interesting when I first saw it because I was expecting, I mean, you do see the density of the detections start right here, but the number of detections per day actually goes up at the end, which is not what I was expecting. I was expecting them to just like die. But I asked the manufacturer, and it says that this is sort of like their mad flapping of the arms before the barrel goes over the falls, I guess, of the tags. They just sort of like ping like crazy as they're dying, and then that's it. So I think that's what we're actually seeing here. But yeah, so this is what the most basic plot that I needed looks like, and you can do it with just a single line of code with ggplot. So do you guys have any questions about this line so far? Is everybody feeling okay for the most part?
You didn't need the scale feature?
I didn't need it here because I had changed the variable that I'm mapping to the x-axis to a date variable, and ggplot's defaults are pretty good, and it recognized date as a continuous x-axis variable, I think, is what happened. We could try passing it and see what happens. Let's see. Yeah, so it's saying that my variable is a continuous variable as well, so it's having trouble coercing it to a discrete. Okay, and then, yeah.
So date would be continuous, but let's say you have samples that maybe aren't spaced evenly.
Sure, yeah.
Is there a specific syntax to plot things with that format where you've got?
So I would, if you've got dates and you want to treat them as a discrete axis, then I would just not convert the date column to dates and just sort of keep it as characters, or you can assign them levels and order them the way that you want as levels of a factor.
If you have unevenly spaced dates and you want to represent that on the graph, then you want to do this.
Right, yeah,
Because that's continuous data.
Okay.
So then you want it as a date class variable, and ggplot will recognize it as such.
But you can specify the units of the x-axis. You can specify the limits of the x-axis. So if you want some displayed, or you want to skip some because they're a bunch clustered together and then they're some far apart, you can specify all of that within the x-axis arguments and aesthetic. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Is something burning?
Yeah, this smells like it.
Okay. As long as it's not on my hard drive.
There's a fire in there. What? right here.
Do you need help? Does anybody have a water? Yeah. Water.
Somebody has some double chocolate extra some. That's the closest place to bring this thing. Wow. This is the best drug meeting ever.
Yeah. And don't worry, we don't need to learn. This is fine.
It is kind of concerning now. The things I'll do to get out of it. It's like I'm trying to get out of it.
You can see the smoke on the projector.
Yeah. Like how smoky does it have to get?
Yeah.
Go up. I'm not like the alarms can go out.
Oh,
That's true.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I don't think the sprinklers go off.
No, I think they have to be like actual flames.
Well, if they are, then all of our computers.
Yeah.
Another problem.
Yeah, that's
It was in, I don't know, the microwave. So it seems light on fire. Triple burn chocolate. Somebody's gonna be embarrassed about that one.
Oof.
It's too early.
To our 3 internet viewers, we just had a small fire event.
Not a single fire alarm.
Yeah,
anywhere.
yeah.
Sprinklers coming on.
All right. So, yeah, I really can't follow that, actually. All right, so somebody was asking a question. Got the discrete variable answered. All right. So this is just, we had that basic scatter plot, and if I wanted to add a little bit more information to this plot, then one of the things you can do, or one of the things that I did right away was just I want to color the dots by the actual tag ID because there's only 9, so I just want to see if they're pinging randomly, if they're well distributed, if they're all mixed, or if one of them is like taken over. So, and then I'm telling it, so mapping the tag ID to the color aesthetic, mapping the shape ID to the color aesthetic, or the tag ID to the shape aesthetic as well, just so I can really see the different tags, and then just changing the size of those points. So it's going to be an ugly plot, but it will give me information that I want. So, oh, sorry, I think we... Okay, so it's saying a continuous variable cannot be mapped to shape. I think when I did this before, I changed my tag IDs because they're numeric. R thinks that they're integers, so I changed them to characters so that I could actually map them to discrete shapes, but I don't have time to do that now live, so we'll just map it to color, and then it's going to give me a color map. All right, yeah. So...
Those aren't, you wanted those to be 9 discrete.
Yeah, yeah. So, but instead, because my tag IDs are like, they're all in the 7,000 range, it's thinking that this is what I wanted, but that's okay. This is a good demonstration as well. So it looks like, I can't really tell without saying, but it looks like there's just one tag, and I know this because I know the data, but there's one tag that really just dominated the entire tank the whole 2 weeks that the experiment was going, and it's this one right here, and that's the one that really like set off as it was dying. All right, so
back in your code there,
yeah,
all that stuff you have in the second geom point thing, that color, that tag ID inside, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Could that just be up in where you add geom point in the first?
It sure could. Yeah, it actually could, and you can actually put it in the mapping of aesthetics. In the ggplot original, in this aesthetic specification as well, just because the aesthetic arguments, you can map more than one variable to the same aesthetic. So wherever you put that aesthetic, and that's one of the confusing things about ggplot 2 as well, is if I put it here, it's going to give me the same thing. You can see that the plot actually hasn't changed at all, even though I put those point aesthetics within the aesthetic mapping of that first data mapping aesthetic. So you can move them around. And I'm not doing complicated enough things to where the nuances of that have gotten me into trouble yet, but just know that you can pass aesthetic arguments to any aesthetic argument in any layer that you're adding. So whether it's the geometry layer or the data layer that you started with.
But the general thing you want for all your layers, you put it in the main aesthetic, and then it'll
yeah.
go down to your lines and your points and whatever else.
Yeah, I think so. But
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brandon Herr says if you wrap your tag ID in as factor, then you'll get your, right in the ggplot.
Oh, okay. Oh, sure.
Then you'll get your discrete scale.
Okay.
Because it'll turn it into a factor, and then I'll
Yeah,
have
so
those.
around the tag ID, yeah.
Is there a capital F?
No.
Yeah, that would work.
All right, let's try that. Still didn't like it. Oh, because hang on, sorry. Sorry, guys. Yeah, this split screen is really messing with me. Yeah, there we go. Thanks. Yeah, so now we can see that blue one looks like either 7535 or 7541. Probably 7535, eliminating the data here. All right, so that's just one geometry, the scatter plot. And then I wanted to show you, somebody was asking about violin plots with the confidence intervals. This is a little different than that, but let's see. Anticipate this here. This is a jitter plot with violin densities around it, or it was. Very weird. Okay, that doesn't look like it did. And I think it's because of the continuous variable tag IDs. But so this is showing all of the detections for each tag on its own jitter plot line, and I flipped the coordinates with that coordinate flip argument. And this was just to give me a sense of whether each tag had a similar distribution of detections across the time series or a similar number of detections across the time series. So if I had specified the tag ID as a factor from the get-go, those violin plots would be wrapped around each data or each tag ID. Yeah, well, it's like a box plot, but where the box is a density plot basically. So instead of just having a square box, you're actually seeing it conform to of where the density of points are. So you can kind of
continuous in a box plot.
Right. Yeah, so it's just sort of an alternative to the box plot. And there's a link to all of the code to do that, and sort of a step-by-step version. I'll have that as a link on the through these. And so you can see we've added some other arguments like labels, titles. There's a couple of different ways to add labels and titles in ggplot. There's an actual function called ggtitle if you want to just do the main, or you can do labs labels here and do it all in one. The position argument, if you're making like a stacked bar graph or a grouped bar chart, this position can either be stacked or dodged, so you can place them side by side or stacked on top of each other. And then themes are something that exists that I'm not going to talk about much here because they're pretty involved, but it's a quick way to get rid of the legend that shows up when you automatically map a continuous variable to an aesthetic. ggplot will automatically generate a legend for you, which is really nice normally, but if you're adding it as a layer and you don't care about the legend in that layer, you can tell it to have a position for the legend of none, and that'll get rid of the legend as well. All right, so now we're going to look at the average daily temperature across tanks. I just want to see how similar they are to make sure that the temperature wasn't crazy in the tank that the detections were going off on, because temperature can have an effect on these acoustic tags. So I did this to show you that you can have a valid ggplot specification and it'll save it to an object, but it won't actually plot when you tell it to print P because there are no layers in the plot. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you can see the console here. So here I said P is an object ggplot. We're plotting temperature. We're mapping date to X, mean temperature to Y, and I want the color to show the three different temperature loggers. There are 3 different hobos in there, and I want to see the color be mapped to those 3 different temperature loggers. But I haven't specified the actual geometry of the plot. So it's saying that when I ask it to display P, saying, well, if I can't display it, there's no layers. So it has data, and it knows where to pull those data from once I tell it where to map once I tell it where to map the aesthetics to, but I haven't told it what the plot looks like yet. So we'll say, okay, here's what I want it to look like. Let's do a line. So this is what the line looks like. So we've got just a regular line plot. The 3 lines represent the 3 different hobos that are in the tank. And I just wanted to make sure that all of the average temperatures were similar. I mean, this is a pretty small scale of variation. It's, between 13 and 14 degrees, basically, 14.5 degrees. So it's not like a huge range. It looks like a range because of the way that I put it on the y-axis, but it's good to see that all 3 tanks are doing similar things. All right, so, and then, again, if you want to just play with the aesthetics, this will make the line thicker, add a transparency alpha of 0.5, change the line type. There are 6 different line types that you can do, and if you just do double question mark line type, that'll pop up in the help documentation. You can see which line types they are, and then a size. So that's how those aesthetics have changed the plot. All right, and then I just want to show you these same data like in several different ways so that you can see that ggplot is just extremely flexible in terms of how you want to display the same data. So here we're going to do that same thing. So that's the main thing. It doesn't, if I try to plot it right now, it won't plot anything because we haven't mapped any aesthetics to it. And now I'm telling it to map the minimum value. So if you look at temp, this is what the data frame looks like. Wow, give me the whole thing. So it's just date, the hobo, the maximum temperature for that date, the minimum temperature for that date, and the mean temperature for that date. So ribbon plot is just going to plot those things in a line and a ribbon so that I can see the actual full range of a temperature for each day. So different geometry specifications have different required aesthetics that it won't be able to create a plot for you unless you supply those required arguments, and you can see which ones are required by going into the help documentation. Those arguments are bolded, and so for ggribbon, required arguments is ymin, ymax, and the y itself, which we specified earlier in this line right here. So, and then this is adding a stat summary. So keep the geometry ribbon, but the function, this is just in the help documentation, the example, I wanted to create a median line along the ribbon. So that's what this stat summary is doing. Each mispack, okay.
Looks like you don't have it installed.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I was doing this on my PC. I'm sorry. That one must have it. Are there any questions about anything that we've done so far? Yeah.
So I guess my main thought, both by ggplot and now, is like, all this stuff is cool, and like, I guess you know, once you start using it, you might think it's easier, but it's like, it is a steep learning curve.
Yes.
I don't necessarily think it's inherently any easier. I think it's actually more challenging than base plot. At least that's for me. But my question is, I would be excited to use this if. So there's certain things that base plot just does really, really poorly, like error bars on bar. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You can't do error bars. So like you have the dots, and you want to have error bars in the dots, or like the 95 confidence intervals around like a line of best fit.
Right.
Is that stuff like that, which is what ecologists and people like us do all the time? Is it easy to do in here?
Yes.
It
Yeah,
is.
error bars are just a geometry. So you just, I'll show it, I have it on the slide later. It's just P plus error bar, and then you can specify the actual statistics of the error bar if you want in the argument. But yeah, it's just passed as a layer. So just like the smoothing line was at the beginning, error bars are just another layer that you can slap onto the plot as you go. And that, I think that's one argument. I mean, that's the argument for ggplot too.
Yeah,
Is
that that alone would make
Yeah.
it easy if it were easy.
Yeah.
And I guess we could talk about it. Maybe.
Oh, no, it's okay. So. Okay, let's see if this works. Yay. Well, the median line's not showing up, but, oh, because I didn't save it. Yeah. So, in partly answering to your question, so what I like about ggplot is it allowed me to create 3 completely different graphs of the exact same information in the way that I wanted to create them in way less time than it would have taken me to do in ArtBase. So it is a really steep learning curve, but it starts to pay off really quickly if you invest in that learning curve, I would say. And there are just so many resources out there now too that I feel like I learned ggplot 2 more quickly in the last month than I would have learned it if I tried to learn it a year ago in the same amount of time, because just so much stuff has come out to help that, and Noam has some great resources that I tapped into to get ready for this presentation. So it's a steep learning curve, but yeah, it's worth it, and I think you can do it less time now than you could ever have done it.
So, okay, are you going to do something with those arrows or something like that?
Yeah. In fact, let's just go back to the yeah, we'll go back to the slideshow because hopefully this is giving you guys an idea of what the argument specifications are. But we can, if you have specific questions, we can go through them later as well. Okay, so the ggplot2 frequently asked questions are exactly what Matt is asking, and one of the top ones on the Stack Overflow is how do I add error bars? And the answer is it's just a geometry that you add to your plot. And these are the required arguments of that the geom error bar function. So you just have to tell it what x you want, what y max you want, what y min you want in terms of where you want the error bars to show up and how much you want to show up. But yeah, it's just a single layer that you add on top of the plot.
So for something like that, do you need to have like a vector of your error bars, like your negative and positive errors, and then like it passes all the different points for all the different bars, or?
Yeah,
I haven't
so
had
in your
to do it
data
yet.
frame, you have a column that's X,
Right.
and a column that's Y, and then a column that is Y minus 2 standard deviations and Y plus 2 standard deviations.
Right.
And those which you put in for Y max and Y min.
Okay. So
You still have to calculate your standard error.
well, that
Yeah.
was my question, because one of the things I thought was actually sort of cool about what you showed earlier was like when we scaled the variables. You didn't
Oh,
have to
sure.
do that in your data.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
for this sort of thing, you have to do it in your data and then have a.
No, you can do that in there too. I mean, there are a couple of different ways to do it. You could put, Y max in there. Y max equals Y minus,
One standard
error.
deviation.
And it's,
Yeah.
or you can do it through the stats argument. There's a, and I think even in the examples for geom error bar, there are some ones in there that's just saying, the stat equals the composite or something like that.
Yeah, so you still have to calculate it, but it does simplify things a little bit. All right, and then how you actually save a ggplot, it's just this argument. It automatically remembers the last plot, so the default for the plot argument is the last plot, so you can just say, after you've created a plot, just say ggsave and then tell it what you want it to name it, and it'll save that into your working directory without, you don't have to actually tell it which plot, unless it's something that you've created earlier. And specify the height and width. And then, units are measurement of the height and the width. So if you want to save it in centimeters or inches or whatever. So the width and the height are just in, you know, a number or a numeric, and then units will convert it to what you want it to. All right, so yeah, and then just more horoscopic advice. Definitely have tidy data, and then watch your data classes. We saw how it can mess with your scale or with your aesthetic mapping just in the tag ID. So continuous versus discrete definitely makes a difference. And if you know what you have in your data to begin with, that'll help a lot. And then there is a ggplot2 FAQ on Stack Overflow that is particularly helpful. Most of the answers take minutes to implement with your own data, I've found. So don't shy away from Stack Overflow. And then this all, of course, will be on the website, and you can download all of these materials, even the raw data, if you want to mess around with the plots themselves. And there's also going to be links to more teaching resources. There's a full set of videos by the variance guys. Anyway, they have a full set of ggplot2 video tutorials that I found very helpful. And that's it. Yeah.
It was quite on at first, is how you've got different parts of your plot separated by plus signs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, does any other type of package do that, or is that just unique to the plot?
The rethinking, I guess, yeah. When I said that it's helpful to have the plus sign at the end of the lineup, I was expecting everybody to nod because I don't know. Everybody does the rethinking statistics package from Richard McElroy's class. You have to pass a ton of different arguments separated by a plus sign. So maybe that's the only place that I'm borrowing it from.
I guess it's useful because it makes it kind of modular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Modular is a good way to think of it, and it's actually modules within modules because you know it's aesthetics within the geometry module and aesthetics within the data module and aesthetics within the scale module. Yeah.
How easy is it, let's say you had any sort of problem like an outlier, and you wanted to actually label an outlier.
Mm-hmm.
Is it easy to put a label on a point? Or?
Yeah, that's true. You can annotate ggplots, and that's on the FAQ as well. I think it's pretty comparable to base R, at least the one time that I had to do it. I just put a label on a single bar in a bar chart, and that was really easy to do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's this geom text.
Yeah.
You know, and geom text takes X, Y, and text value, essentially. Mm-hmm. So you add that as a layer, but you just have a very limited amount of data, right? Because the data is just one. If it's one label, you know, then it's just a.
And now when you say X, Y, is that like?
Yeah, that's like where it is on the Cartesian
like
plane. Yeah.
Like really
yeah. But you can also map it to the data itself. So you can map the geometry, geom text layer to an aesthetic of X, Y, and you would just have to create an identity that X and Y would understand that is the translation of that data point that you want. But yeah.
Oh yeah. So this only works with data frames, right?
Yeah.
What does dplyr give you when it pops out? Is that data frame? Or
Yeah.
Is it matrix?
No.
What is the type? What is the format?
It's a data frame.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've been using dplyr in conjunction with this a lot. Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out this week functional graph. Do you have a suggestion to make it so that you can use it? Because right now I can make it. You know, in the sense that if you want to what if I don't want that?
So you're talking about fastening with, okay, and you want the x-axis to be the same on sort of like a pairwise, or so many panels but a similar axis on across the top and the bottom? They're not the same data set necessarily? Yeah. 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 I'm not totally sure I understand. It sounds like a par issue. Like,
are you just like you have multiple graphs that are fairly different that you're just trying to put into
A single
just like make
plot?
one graphic out of? Okay, so yeah, so then when you do that, you can,
do par
sort
MF
of
row.
the equivalent of par. So par, well, one of the things that par can do in base graphics is you say you have, like, give me 2 plot windows and then make one plot, and that first one will go in the first plot window, and the second will go in the second plot window. Define those with, I'm forgetting the command. So the thing about ggplot is actually based on a graphic system called grid. So grid is like sort of the base package that it's built on top of. And so grid has a thing where you create grid window 1 and grid window 2. You create in ggplot, you create one chart with, that's called P and one chart that's called Q, and you say in the I'm not remembering the commands, but using the grid package commands, you define window 1, window 2, put plot P in the first window and plot Q in the second window, and then you have one graphic if you're combining multiple graphs, essentially. If your graphs have the same x-axis and y-axis, you can plot them so that they have, so that, for instance, like if they're the same variables, you can make it so that their scales are either the same size or are, what are, scaled appropriately for that particular subset of the data. You can actually say free scales or fixed scales. Same scale across everything, or free sizing of those scales across everything.
And you can just have one of the scales be free, like if you want the y-axis to be able to vary with the data, then that's just scale y free, and that's a scale argument that you would pass into ggplot too, and then you would have that within your gridded window aesthetics.
Can you recently program for that command works with ggplot, or that's what facet is for?
That's what facet is for, basically, if you're using ggplot too. But it sounds like if you have completely different data sets and you have completely different plots for those data sets and you want to include them together in the same one, then to me that seems like you would be able to do that with par MF row and then just save it as.
Well, that's what you have to use grid for.
Oh,
at that point,
okay.
Because sort of the base graphic system is entirely different, so it doesn't work well with par.
Oh, okay. All right, then I was misunderstanding.
Because the base graphics at ggplot, or
well, so there's this base, your normal, the things that are the default. But the thing is, ggplot was built. Somebody built a sort of a whole nother from the ground up system for drawing, essentially, because base is essentially drawing, and so grid was another system for drawing, and then ggplot was built on top of grid, but to put this sort of grammar logic of mapping data to the information. But grid is sort of a different drawing system than base has, and so it's where you could take a ggplot object and then use grid to like draw random lines and different stuff on it, because like that's just sort of how the computer does drawing.
So you want to draw like a one-to-one line or something?
Yeah.
Grid.
Well, I mean, most of those things you'd end up doing through ggplot anyway, because the syntax is sort of consistent, more consistent through there. And if you want to like draw a one-to-one line, there's just like a, just like in base, there's an AV line command, which you say, intercept 0, slope 1 at that line. It's just another layer.
Doing 2 columns in 1 row. I just want to see if. Yeah, I don't think it played well with that. No. Just give me the second one.
We keep getting helpful comments from Brandon online. Remember the grid extra package is what lets you do that. And he also mentioned there's just this annotate command for ggplot2 when you're sort of putting
And
a label here and there, rather than structured things, which you might want, like a label on each point.
right.
Yeah.
And so, but typically, like if you want to put all your different fish tags in that have a different reference run, you would use like facet typically to look at that. Let's say you want each tag to be a different.
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, again, I'd have to. Well, actually, it should work with,
But
even if
so
it's continuous.
you would need to use this grid thing if you were looking at a tag versus, I don't know, some other thing.
Tag detections versus temperature or something. Yeah, and
Yeah, right.
relying on a different data set for the two plots, but you want to see them side by side.
Similar or something like that. That we grid to put them in the same figure.
I guess so. Yeah, I haven't used it yet, but it sounds like what both our online help and Noam have experience with. Yeah.
Is there a way to set up like a global theme that maybe you don't want the gray background in the grid?
Yeah.
Save that and just all some theme.
Yeah, that's actually literally what themes are and what they do.
Rosemary Hartman last year did a whole session on themes, and we have it up, and it was sort of specific to like what do you need in the theme for irritating journal requirements. Like, okay, so like these are the colors you're limited to, and you have to have strict black and white. So all of those things, sort of arguments that go into a theme, and you can save that. And then there's like a bunch of people have put up, you can, as packages, a bunch of themes. So like there's a package called GG theme or something like that, and it's like, this is the theme that makes it look like it's from The Economist, and there's style graphs. And theme that looks like an
538
graph or something like that. So yeah, and like I have a theme that's like what I like use for most of my plots. Like just my default, so I don't have to like change them all the time. It's like the fonts, the color schemes that I prefer.
Axis label size, which are like the biggest issue for PowerPoint presentations.
So even if it's not a predefined theme, like The Economist, which has like all these different, aesthetics, I don't even know what you call them, you can create, I guess what I'm saying is it's simple and immediate, create their own theme where it's like, I always don't want the gray background, but I always want points to be like this, I always want fonts to be like this, I always want this, and just save that and like call it.
Yeah,
And
it's
you just
an
say
argument
plus
Matt's
theme.
theme.
Plus Matt's,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's easy to make Matt's theme.
And if you look in the, you look at the help for theme, it's just like, here are the 35 arguments for theme, which is like what the line, like axis line thicknesses should be, and like background color should be, and all of those.
So you just have to put in the time to do it once.
Yeah, and then where do you save that?
Right.
I don't know. I haven't done it yet.
Copy your script every time. But
Yeah, so you could have a script which defines like map theme equals in parenthesis this, and then you say you source that to do it. I have a package which is like all of the little things that I prefer, and so
He's on another level.
yeah.
No, that was my question basically.
Yeah. I can try to find out better answers to some of the questions that I didn't have better answers for and include that with the repo as well. Yeah, I'm sure it's on GitHub. Just fork it.
For whatever, I guess it goes on GitHub or whatever the longer like the stuff is. I guess if I assume you might have been doing this anyway, but there's besides the Stack Overflow ggplot, there's other really great resources. Even if it's like video, like at least like videos of people doing stuff.
Oh yeah.
Whatever
it's on
it
there
is.
right now, actually.
Put it on there.
Yeah. I'll show it to you here. Okay, so. Okay, so here's the repo for it, and here are all the files. I have to add a README, but once I add the README, all of the links, if you just scroll down, it'll just show an actual documentation for it. So now, when we scroll down, I'll add all of the HTML links to the video resources that I found and things like that, and you'll just be able to click on them from this page.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, sure. And the slides will be up there too. And the slides have links in them because they're all HTML. So if you just go through the slides, if you don't remember where it was, you'll be able to find it there.
Thank you.
Sure.
So anyone ever pick up their birds?
Oh, we have a